Welcome to NBA Jam! Tonight's matchup, Bulls versus...
We know one thing humans love once somebody's up that high is they love to see them come down. That's the best part of the story sometimes, right? And or like the most interesting part. And Jordan's fall came in kind of like two hits. First, it was all this information leaking out that actually Michael Jordan's an asshole. You know, like there was they talk about it in the film, the Stan Smith's book coming out with all these anecdotes of what it's like to be Michael Jordan's teammate. And we're going to get into that a little later. But then the big one was the gambling, is that this guy has a serious gambling addiction, or what he calls it, I have a competitiveness addiction. And it just takes the form of gambling. So a little bit just the facts of the matter. In 1991, I believe it is, he has to take the stand in a trial because there was a golf hustler, mafia linked, drug dealing linked guy named Slim Buller that Michael had played golf with. And when he was arrested, he had a check from Michael Jordan in his possession for $57,000 that from some golf gambling debt. He changed his story on that. First, he said it was a loan. And then he admitted that, no, it was a debt that he owed this guy. And then, you know, you have these stories like after he lost game one against the Knicks in 1993, back when Billy had these false hopes that Cookie Monster wasn't going to eat the cookies this time around after the Knicks took game one. And then he was caught in Atlantic City the night before game two with his dad gambling until like 1 a.m. or whatever it was. And the next thing is 2 hours away from New York?
Sure.
I don't know.
Yeah, Atlantic City. Yeah, New Jersey, right there.
And you know, and then he came back and they lost game two. So this information came out after they lost game two. And so there's like a need to gamble here, it seems like. There's a guy who wrote a book called Richard Esquinas, who was a golfing friend of Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan denies this part. He says that Jordan lost $1.2 million gambling on golf in 1 week with him. And I know now we talk about Jordan as this guy who has $2.1 billion, but at this stage in his career, he didn't. He was actually considered an underpaid player at this stage. He was making, I forget what it was, like $3 million a year or something along those lines. And he had his endorsement, but you know, Nike at the beginning, it was $250,000 a year. At this point, he's definitely into the millions, but he's not a billionaire. Like going out and losing $1 million in a golf game is a hit.
Yeah.
And it's in this moment as this stuff's starting to come out that Michael Jordan's dad turns up murdered. Do you remember
that?
Do you remember this?
I do remember that. Yeah.
There's a
I remember
whole
being kind of shocked about it.
And so the story is that he pulled over. The official story is that he pulled over, had to have a nap, and these guys rolled up on him to rob him, and they ended up killing him. And then the car was found all smashed up, and yeah, it was like. And then they found the guys with 2 of Michael Jordan's world championship rings that I guess his dad maybe was wearing. There's a bunch of like strange circumstances around the murder, which in and of itself don't mean it didn't happen or that the official story is not true, but it's just like it adds to this story of something's fishy here. And so of all Michael Jordan has like tons of stats of like the only one in NBA history to do this, you know, the only one to get 50 points in 4 straight playoff games or whatever, stuff like this, right? Mm-hmm. One of the other records, and this is not proof, but it's just interesting to put out there, I think he's the only player whose dad was murdered like during the season, you know, it's like, or while he's there, which, you know, it's just, I'm just saying like the timing of like checks are being found, you know, in gangsters' pockets and stuff like this. And then there's stories that he's losing millions of dollars here and blah, blah, blah. And you can see
saying that Michael Jordan contributed to the murder of his father somehow?
Absolutely not. Because I'm absolutely not saying that. There's no evidence, direct evidence of that. What I am saying is that if, let's say, I go up to heaven and they say, okay, there's different rooms here, and we've got this really great room, Jessica Alba's in it, and a lot of people you want to hang out with, Jimi Hendrix, but like
Alba?
The way to get that was my I'm in the 90s right now or whatever it was, that was my crush, you know.
I'm with it.
they're all in this room. But this room, the way to get into this room is you have to show you have good judgment. You have to show, that you can kind of like weigh things and blah, blah, blah. So simple question. Do you think, if you have to guess, that like Michael Jordan's lifestyle and gambling and who he was hanging out with had something to do with the murder of his father? I'm voting yes. And
yeah,
I don't know.
I gotta look at it, man. I missed this whole part. So does the documentary sort of imply this as well, or is that?
And this
is more.
This is where you have to mention something important about the documentary, and where it kind of represents Michael Jordan's power on display. Is that this footage? The documentary is based around really intimate footage of the Chicago Bulls' final season with Michael Jordan in 1998. That's why it's called The Last Dance. It's their last title run. And the film wasn't released for 20 years or more, 22 years, right? Because Michael Jordan has veto power on this thing being released. And he actually, something to know about this, about a little bit about his character, he made the call to the producers and said, okay, I'm down to do it. Do you know when he made that call? It was the day, it was 2016, and it was the day of the Cleveland Cavaliers parade for winning the championship, when LeBron James had arguably one of his best performances ever to defeat the Warriors, who were the team that had broken Jordan's own record for most wins in a season. And then LeBron, not single-handedly, but like if there is one of those moments where you go, okay, this might be the best player of all time. This is when LeBron really, people started going, you know what? There started to be voices around like Shannon Sharp or whatever saying, this is the dude. Like, this guy's better than Jordan. And Jordan just calls up and goes like, time to unleash the film. Let's fucking come over today. We're going to do the interview. It's like, and anyways, so he has veto power. So there's a lot of power here, which means he has some control over the message, right? He's deeply involved in this film. And so obviously they can't make this film without talking about the fact that there was people talking about these rumors and his gambling problems and blah, blah, blah. But he's always getting the last word, and it's always ending up with like a musical montage about his perseverance. And that's how this one ends as well. And so it's as a filmmaker, there's a huge ethical question here. Like there's always the ethics of like the people that are appearing in the film, the people that are the subject of the film. What's your relationship like with them? And I feel like, and the last word on this was that, you have like Bob Costas and people like this coming on, friends of Jordan basically, who were commentators during the 90s, coming on and saying it was journalism's worst hour. All these completely, uncalled for, inappropriate suspicions being thrown out as questions. It was like, man, there was plenty of reasons for journalists to be throwing those questions out there and talking about it. And then Jordan goes on retirement, right? For almost 2 years.
3 years? 2 years? Okay.
Almost 2 years. Goes to play baseball and all this stuff.
Right.
David Stern was the commissioner at the time, and people suspected that this was David Stern kind of suspending Michael, but acknowledging that you can't be clear about this. You can't, this gambling scandal, especially if it involves his dad getting killed, are going to ruin the Jordan brand, the NBA brand, the Chicago Bulls brand. There's billions of dollars out here to be ruined right now. I'll just finish by saying that if the official story is true and Jordan is having to suffer through his father being murdered and then having people like me and others suspecting that, he played a role, that doesn't mean he's responsible for the people who murdered his father are the people who murdered his father, right? And the people and if somebody else ordered it, that person's equally responsible. Michael Jordan doesn't have that level of responsibility, but he was definitely gambling with the mob, all this stuff, has some sense of what he was dealing with. And I don't know what percentage of the responsibility that is, but if the official story is true and if Michael Jordan is right, then I have an unbelievable amount of sympathy for that guy. And if I was him, I would also use my power to control the narrative around that story. I would also be like, you guys are irresponsible. Sure, we can acknowledge this controversy, but like, yeah, I want a musical montage about my perseverance after that, because you guys have put me through fucking hell. That's one of the worst. Imagine your father being brutally murdered, and then
I couldn't even imagine that. Yeah.
And then you being blamed for it, as if you were the one that pulled the trigger.
Right.
So yeah, we don't know the truth though.
Good job, Jess.